Hello and welcome to what I can only assume is some sort of Chinese monkey paw hell. Today we're talking about a game called Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, a game about being a rich and attractive old fart who can still tear up the dance floor and occasionally pick up chicks with nothing but pure sexual energy and wizard powers, but never taking them home because your dick doesn't work except for genital mutilation. It's a game about being a vampire.
I wanted Marvel's Safe Man Hammered Up to make me feel like
Bloodlines is a bit of a cult classic. A very well-respected RPG that has only become more respected since its release. I say RPG, I don't actually know what that word means anymore, since fucking Monster Hunter, an action game by all appearances, won RPG of the Year, and then Australia gave RPG of the Year to a David Cage game. But luckily this game came out in a simpler time, when genres made sense, and when people acted depressed because it was cool, and not because life is unbearably lonely and anime isn't real. Anime didn't even exist yet. But I was a wee lad then, and you were likely even weer of a lad, hypothetical viewer, and even if we had been older on the day of its release, we wouldn't have bought this shit because it came out the same day as Half-Life 2. So I'd like to shed some light on a game you very well might have looked over. Bloodlines, at its core, is an action RPG with either third-person melee or first-person ranged combat, depending on your sexual orientation. The game is mostly comprised of walking around Sodom and Gomorrah doing quests for commies and soda-pop billionaires, sneaking and shooting and keeping your zinc levels up to complete your objectives. And probably the best way to get you an idea of how the missions in this game normally go is to give you a bit of an example. Somewhat early into the game, Mr. Fizz asks you to break into a cargo ship that happens to be transporting an Assyrian demon king, and he wants you to say hello. He encourages you not to kill anyone on board, but how you approach that and whether you listen to his pussy shit is largely up to you. You can sneak in, or you can shoot some niggas, and besides that, the choices you have are divided further by the skills you have, by what kind of character you have. If you're able to keep yourself from yelling something stupid, you can talk your way into some valuable info. If you have lockpicking or computer hacking, you can open up other routes, possibilities, and if you have some super secret vampire spirit spells, you can do some kinky shit to keep the guards busy. Hell, if you just fucking keep your eyes open, you might notice that you can hop over their heads and eventually find the crane controls and terrorize the police force with cargo containers falling from the sky, which happens to be the perfect untraceable weapon.
God, it's so good.
It's pretty simple, source engine stuff, and while the Deus Ex style freedom and approach makes it stand apart, this is what I consider to be the game's strong point. I mean, fuck, if I wanted to recommend something like that, I would just tell you to play Deus Ex. I mean, it does it better. And besides that, while it's nice when you do get this kind of freedom, and in a lot of missions you do, some you don't. Sometimes you just have to fight a big boss monster, and if you were trying to build some other sort of non-combat character, you're kind of fucked. You can't sneak away from the bosses, you can't persuade the bosses, and worst of all, you can't try to have sex with the bosses. Now, if there's different options were there all the time, we'd be having maybe a different conversation. But as it stands, the combat's good, you know, it's serviceable, but luckily this game excels in other areas, and that's what I want to talk about. The game starts with character creation, where you have absolutely no control over how your character looks. I really hope you don't want to be Asian. But you have a surprising amount of control over how your character functions. You've got your standard character builds, you know, fighter, mage, cheerleader, Jew, and which one you choose is actually important further than just the starting stats. Like if you choose the Nosferatu, for instance, you will be playing a different fucking game, because you will not be able to walk the streets and interact with the human cattle like literally every other clan in the game. Instead, you will be sent away down to the dank sewage tunnels littered with your 6 million rat friends. And the footage I'm using here is from my second playthrough, and to match my decaying mental fortitude, I chose a Malkavian. the vampires that get into arguments with stop signs and have bathrooms stocked with estrogen pills because they're extremely mentally unstable. Most people suggest you don't play a Malkavian on your first playthrough, and that's probably because you'll often be stuck staring at your dialogue options, wondering what the fuck any of this shit is supposed to mean. But incoming hot tip, Malkavian females are the only player characters in the game with tit physics. Playing as a Malkavian, though, made me more fully appreciate one of the stronger points of this game, which is the writing. Already, no matter what type of vampire you play as, Bloodlines has a fucking ton of well-written and fully voice-acted lines, which, you know, is a lot more impressive back in fucking 2004. But as a Malkavian, every conversation has this new stupid bullshit you can say, and a lot of times, the characters you're interacting with have new shit to say back in response to your stupid bullshit.
Oh shit, I'm Malkavian.
It actually reminds me a lot of playing a low int build in Fallout 2, where most of the people in the game just have no fucking clue what you're saying. It's a little bit like that, and it's nice. It's a little touch, right? It makes you feel like the things, your character actually matters. Like, the characters are reacting to what you say, yeah, but they're also reacting to who you are. And it makes it so that, like, the character creation in the beginning wasn't just fucking pointless. Oh, and make sure you choose a good vampire code name. Anyway, you're treated to a scene of hot undead on dead on nipple ring sex before you're turned into a vampire. Then some political drama happens, is not important, and then you're recruited by the fizzy water magnate himself, Mr. LaCroix. Once the little prologue finishes, you're released to explore Santa Monica, which is the first of the game's 4 hub areas. You see, unlike, say, a Bethesda game, where all the interesting shit is broken up by long expanses of nothing, Bloodlines instead cuts the world down to just 4 main areas, with little outside zones on occasion. Clearly there are benefits to both ways of doing things, but it seems to have been done, if not partially because it's probably cheaper and faster, but also because it allowed the developers at Troika to focus on what mattered: the writing and the atmosphere. I've already mentioned briefly the quantity of writing. There are tons of dialogue options, lines that are specific to your clan, lines that are specific to your stats, but more importantly is the quality. The characters as a whole are written in a way that makes them feel like real people, with motivations and personalities that aren't just conducive to your story. They feel like they exist outside of your story. And it is helped somewhat by the fact that a lot of them are just fucking assholes, but this is LA. You know, that's realistic. And they're memorable. They're memorable characters, whether it's the stuck-up hippie bitch, or the black conspiracy theorist Vietnam vet, or the woman-turned-ghoul who you may or may not have recruited into a life of sexual slavery. They all feel well thought out and realized. They have lines that feel like they fit with their characters and sound like things an actual fucking human being would say, if my memory isn't failing me. And that perhaps should not be much of a compliment, but we're talking about fucking video games here. It's actually a pretty big one.
No, this isn't happening! There's no reason for me to go on. What? What am I fighting for?
There's a sense of believability that can be felt throughout Bloodlines, and the writing is a big part of that. If you don't notice it while playing it, then it's probably doing its fucking job, because it's good enough that it allows you to suspend your disbelief. You don't have to think about it. On top of that, the people in this world, they aren't neatly divided into good and evil characters belonging to good and evil factions. There's a reasoning behind all of it. Basically, to give a gist of it, the general conflict in this game is between the Camarilla and the Anarchs. There's a lot of other shit going on too, but that's like the big one. One of which loves carbonated water, and the other of which thinks that shit is a government plot to turn the frogs gay. But there are good and bad people on both sides. And there are good and bad reasons that those people belong to both sides, and therefore good and bad reasons that you might join each side. And what's also important here is that your choices do somewhat matter. I mean, what you say leads to different responses. What you do and how you do it leads to different rewards and outcomes. And there are actually multiple endings, and which ones are open to you depends somewhat on how you acted throughout the game. It's a little unfortunate that these endings seem a bit rushed, but Please tell me you heard that. Oh, I can't fucking do this. What? That was a fucking car, right? That was a car. Please fucking... Oh, please tell me it showed up on the audio. Please. That was a fucking car. Right? There was a fucking car. There's nothing else that could have been. That sound was a car driving by. It's every fucking day. Every fucking day. I'm just trying to live my life, alright? Whatever the fuck I have left, I'm just trying to keep myself going, and every fucking day, noises. Cars driving by, planes flying overhead, fucking children outside laughing every fucking day, and every fucking time I go, like a moron, I go and look outside and try and see what the fuck is making that noise, and it's never a fucking thing. It's nothing. Every single time, it's nothing. There's no one around. Not a fucking soul. Never. They're all fucking gone. There's no one there. I can walk down the street for a fucking mile and a half and not run into a single fucking person. But when I'm sitting in here, without fail, every fucking day, noises, I am losing my fucking mind. I'm losing my fucking mind. Losing my fucking mind.
Hey, Benton, don't crap your pants if you see a vampire out there.
Get lost. You wouldn't recognize a goddamn vampire if one jumped up and bit you on the end of your fucking dick. So just get off my back.
Also, quests in this game, they're never simple fetch quests or boring shit like that you might have in other Bethesda games. They have real characters and motivation, and they're usually, like fun and interesting. Go figure. After playing some recent garbage where I was told simply to grind instead of being given even the simplest of quests, I've sort of come to appreciate quests that actually have you do something interesting. You're actually going out and completing an interesting task with motivation and characters. Whether that's to kill a Japanese shark demon for a white weeb who can't speak Japanese at all, or trying to trick 2 old Chinese men out of their life savings, or just killing a nightclub owner for the Russian mob because she operates her nightclub in a church and that shit just ain't right. Bloodlines takes place in the dark underbelly of Los Angeles, always at night. Obviously, you're a fucking vampire. Half the people you meet are homeless, a quarter of them are prostitutes, and the rest are either goth weirdos or aristocratic assholes. I'm not trying to say the characters are bland, I'm just trying to paint a general picture here. The atmosphere of Bloodlines is obviously most inspired by the fusion of late 90s, early 2000s cities with Victorian architecture and aesthetics. Everything is dirty, it's dark, and it's ambiguous. There are rats in every alley, there are whores on every corner, and gang fights break out at random. So all in all, a pretty realistic depiction of Los Angeles. But despite that, it manages to feel pretty damn comfy. And I don't know exactly why. I mean, the environment is shit. It's Los Angeles, it's garbage. I don't know if it's the music, which sounds like some of the sort of shit you would have listened to in your angsty teenage years.
It's okay, I'm only here for the bad guys.
Or if it's a combination of the things I was talking about before, like the believable characters, the detailed settings, the interesting motivations, the writing, fuck, I'd say a lot of it boils down to little stuff like the TV and radio programs that play in the background at different locations, and they change over time, and Deb is the best girl. Actually, what it probably is the developers at Troika had sort of a vision in mind. Who would have thought of doing something like that? They had a vision in mind, and every part of the game falls into that greater vision, from the little stuff like the radio programs to the big things with the writing and everything like that. It all comes together to make this complete and consistent atmosphere. And maybe it's just the fact that it's so well fleshed out that makes it so comfy. And I might just be biased. I've always wanted a big titty goth GF, but this atmosphere speaks to me. It reminds me of when I was a kid, when I was back in school. I was hanging out exclusively with the weird kids. We watched shitty AMVs, wore nothing but black, and hung out in the one abandoned building in town. It reminds me of my childhood crush, a literal big titty goth girl who was probably my best friend in school before she moved away, and I never worked up the courage to call her after that. And then, about a year or so later, I found out through MySpace that she'd become a he. This probably sounds like some Lolita tier backstory, but I probably dodged a bullet with that one, and my point here is that the atmosphere this game delivers is nostalgic as all hell to me. And while I clearly have some personal bias, I feel it's well enough realized that even someone who wasn't a fucking weirdo can settle into the atmosphere this game has and have a comfy-ass time. There's a bit of sadness there, though. Just as my big-titty goth crush sewed her vagina shut, so too did the developers of this game, Troika, close shut the doors of their creative womb after the game fucking bombed. Despite getting generally good reviews, it sold only 72,000 copies. Why? Probably because Activision, the publisher behind this game, decided it would be a good idea to release an unknown, standalone title on November 16th, 2004, which, if you didn't know, is a week after Halo 2's release, a week before the release of Metal Gear Solid 3, and on the exact same day as the release of Half-Life 2. Who the fuck would have ever thought that shit was going to sell? I wouldn't have bought it. Fucking Activision's a bunch of fucking retards. And so the company, they failed. The company closed down like a few months later, the next February. The saddest part is that Troika, before their closure, was bidding to develop the new Fallout game, which later, of course, became Fallout 3. And likely, I have to assume, because of their lack of funds following Bloodlines' commercial failure, they were outbid by Bethesda. What this means, of course, is that instead of the Fallout 3 we got, we might have seen a completely different game. One that I can only guess would have had a much stronger story and a bigger sense of choice, more akin, likely, to the original 2 Fallout games. But alas, it didn't happen. Todd made sure of that. I didn't get my big titty goth GF, and the world never got Troika's Fallout 3. But we can still be happy about what we did get. A couple of very good games, and the memories. Before I end on that sappy note, let me be clear, this game is not perfect. Like I said before, being forced into boss battles where your skills are useless is pretty cock, and while the gunplay and the melee combat is decent, it's pretty basic, and often the most strategizing you'll be doing is working out how to get the enemy stuck on something so that you can cheese through the fight. Especially if you're not using a combat build, in which case that is almost entirely necessary, and that's fun! Myself, at least, I enjoy that kind of thing on occasion, but it's not really the kind of thing I could recommend you a game for, nor do I believe it's intentional. The game also had a somewhat rushed development, which, unfortunately, does show in parts of the game, especially in how unplayably buggy the game was on release. Which means the unofficial patch, which fixes most of that, is absolutely required to play through the game. And so yeah, it's a little rough in places, but I feel like Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines is a game worth playing. An often overlooked gem that gives us a glimpse into what RPGs could have been.